On the morning of May 14, 1989, a commercial cargo flight touched down on the tarmac at Portland International Airport in Oregon. Inside the pressurized hold of the aircraft, tucked away inside a temperature-controlled wooden crate, sat exactly 14 small, ventilated glass vials. These vials held a cargo that had traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean from the dense woodlands of Western Europe, guarded with strict customs protocols and precise scientific oversight. Yet, as the ground crew unloaded the crate onto a waiting transport truck, none of the workers could have possibly imagined the profound weight of the cargo they were handling, or the sheer scale of the ecological transformation these few specimens were destined to unleash upon the Pacific Northwest. What followed this quiet arrival was a series of events that absolutely no one predicted. A biological shift that left seasoned field researchers stunned and created a case study that ecologists still debate in university lecture halls to this day. This is a story of how a seemingly insignificant intervention rippled through an entire landscape, defying standard models and rewriting the rules of modern conservation. I am Christopher Vance, and this is the full arc of the Oregon Forest Rescue. By the time this account concludes, you will understand three specific things. First, you will see how a biological population of fewer than 24 individuals can fundamentally alter the geography of a massive woodland ecosystem. Second, you will discover the hidden vulnerability that almost destroyed the ancient forests of Oregon from the inside out. And finally, you will understand the precise mathematical reason why traditional human intervention failed where nature ultimately triumphed. But to understand this extraordinary ecological rescue, you have to start with something entirely unexpected: the secret chemical warfare of the European woodland floor. Long before the crisis in the Pacific Northwest, European entomologists had been studying how certain forest ecosystems maintained a state of permanent equilibrium despite being plagued by voracious wood-boring pests. In a landmark study published in the journal Ecologia in 1974, researchers documented how specific predatory insects function as ultimate ecosystem engineers, utilizing hypersensitive olfactory receptors to track down destructive larvae hidden deep beneath the thick bark of mature trees. These predators did not merely hunt, they regulated the very breath of the forest, acting as a natural invisible shield that prevented localized outbreaks from expanding into regional catastrophes. While North American forestry focused heavily on chemical treatments and physical clearing, European science had quietly unlocked the immense potential of targeted biological balance. For decades, the standard approach to forest management in the United States relied on the assumption that a forest could be managed like a standard agricultural crop, where human engineering could fix any imbalance. But that is not what happened. In the late 1980s, the ancient coniferous expanses of eastern and central Oregon began to exhibit alarming signs of a silent internal collapse. Millions of grand firs and Douglas firs, trees that had stood for centuries, suddenly began turning an ominous rusty red color from the crown down. The culprit was a massive, unprecedented outbreak of the balsam woolly adelgid and associated wood-boring pests, organisms that literally starved the trees of nutrients by disrupting their internal fluid transport systems. The scale of the destruction was staggering, with entire mountainsides turning into brittle, tinder-dry graveyards within a matter of months. State agencies poured millions of dollars into aerial chemical spraying and aggressive salvage logging, attempting to halt the spread of the blight by sheer force of human will and industrial machinery. Yet, despite the deployment of thousands of gallons of specialized pesticides and the removal of tens of thousands of infected trees, the die-off only accelerated. The forest was dying faster than the loggers could cut, and the chemicals were inadvertently destroying the native predatory insects that provided what little natural defense the ecosystem had left. By the winter of 1988, standard forestry models predicted that the entire Blue Mountain region would lose more than 80% of its mature canopy within the decade, leading to catastrophic topsoil erosion, the silting of vital salmon streams, and an unprecedented risk of wildfire that threatened nearby human settlements. Top forestry experts openly admitted that they were completely out of options, as every traditional tool in their arsenal had utterly failed to stop the march of the infestation. What they found next changed everything. A small, independent team of researchers from Oregon State University decided to abandon the traditional chemical framework entirely, looking instead toward the complex evolutionary history of the pests themselves. Through genetic mapping and historical tracking, they discovered that these destructive wood-boring organisms were not native to the Pacific Northwest at all, having been accidentally introduced via imported lumber decades prior. Because they had arrived in a new land without the specialized predators that had kept them in check for millennia in their native European habitats, their populations had exploded exponentially, entirely unchecked by the local fauna. The scientists realized that to save the forest, they had to introduce the missing piece of the evolutionary puzzle, a predatory beetle known as Rhizophagus grandis, an insect renowned for its hyper-specialized ability to hunt down and consume the specific larvae, destroying the Oregon canopy. The logistical hurdles were immense, as importing live biological agents into the United States required navigating a labyrinth of federal regulations, environmental impact assessments, and strict quarantine protocols, designed to prevent a secondary ecological disaster. There were profound fears that the introduced beetles might switch targets and begin consuming beneficial native insects, or perhaps fail to survive the harsh, snowy winters of the high Oregon plateaus. After months of intense bureaucratic gridlock and fierce scientific debate, permission was finally granted for a highly restricted, experimental release of just 14 healthy, laboratory-certified adult beetles, which were flown across the ocean and rushed directly to a heavily infested, cordoned-off test site deep within the Malheur National Forest. When the researchers opened those 14 glass vials on that warm May morning and watched the tiny, dark brown beetles crawl out onto the cracked bark of a dying grand fir, the atmosphere was filled with intense skepticism. To the naked eye, releasing 14 minuscule insects into a dying forest spanning hundreds of thousands of acres seemed less like a scientific solution and more like an act of pure desperation. The initial monitoring reports over the first few weeks yielded absolutely no signs of the beetles, leading many agency officials to declare the project an immediate, costly failure. Nobody expected what came after. And here is where the story turns on a piece of pure luck. In October of 1990, during a routine, despondent survey of the experimental zone, a young graduate student happened to trip over a decaying log several hundred yards outside the original release perimeter. As he reached down to steady himself against the damp wood, a piece of loose bark broke away in his hand, revealing a sight that caused him to instantly freeze in disbelief. Hidden within the galleries dug by the destructive pests were dozens of unfamiliar, translucent eggs, and several highly active larvae that did not match any known native species. Subsequent laboratory analysis confirmed the impossible. The original 14 beetles had not only survived the transition to the wild, but they had also successfully located mates, reproduced, and begun adapting to their new environment at a speed that completely defied all established entomological models. This accidental discovery completely shifted the trajectory of the research, prompting the team to rapidly secure funding for a massive, multi-year monitoring project utilizing advanced pheromone traps and canopy sampling techniques. As the data began to pour in over the next 3 seasons, the true scope of what was occurring beneath the bark began to emerge, leaving the scientific community utterly spellbound. The beetles possessed an extraordinary, almost supernatural capacity for tracking their prey, guided by volatile chemical signals emitted by the distressed trees themselves as they were being attacked by the wood-boring pests. The predators were essentially using the tree's own distress calls as a homing beacon, flying miles through dense canopy to locate the exact zones where the infestation was most severe. But as the beetles began to expand their territory throughout the early 1990s, the project faced a sudden, terrifying existential threat from an entirely unexpected direction. A massive, politically charged push for industrial salvage logging threatened to clear-cut the exact sectors of the forest where the beetle populations were establishing their strongest footholds. Timber industry representatives argued that the dying forest represented an immediate economic loss and a severe fire hazard that needed to be liquidated immediately, dismissing the beetle experiment as an unproven academic distraction. The researchers found themselves locked in a brutal legal and public relations battle, trying to defend a microscopic, invisible savior against the tangible, immediate pressure of multi-million-dollar logging contracts. This conflict brought a profound new emotional angle to the story, one that transcended simple forest management and touched upon the very core of how humanity views its relationship with the natural world. It became a philosophical battle between the old paradigm of short-term exploitation and a new, humble understanding of ecological interconnectedness, forcing the local community to decide whether they would trust the heavy machinery of man or the subtle, quiet wisdom of the natural world. If the loggers succeeded in clearing those critical zones, the fragile, nascent populations of Rhizophagus grandis would be permanently wiped out, and the entire ecosystem would be left completely defenseless against the ongoing collapse. The stakes had transitioned from a localized scientific experiment to a historic battle for the long-term survival of the iconic wilderness of the American West. But the biggest surprise was still to come. Just as the legal battles reached a fever pitch in the mid-1990s, nature itself delivered the ultimate, definitive payoff that permanently silenced the skeptics and settled the debate once and for all. Visitors who walked into the heart of the Malheur National Forest by the late 1990s were greeted by a sensory experience that felt nothing short of miraculous. Where there had once been the grim, oppressive silence of a dying woodland, broken only by the dry snapping of brittle branches and the ominous, pale red hue of dying foliage, there was now a vibrant, deafening roar of resurgent life. The canopy had shifted from a sickly rust colour back to a deep, rich, emerald green that blocked out the intense summer sun, casting cool, dappled shadows across a forest floor that was suddenly bursting with new growth. The air, which had once smelled faintly of decay and dry dust, was now thick with the crisp, clean scent of fresh pine resin and damp, fertile earth. The numbers gathered by field researchers during this period illustrated a transformation of truly staggering, historic proportions. From those original 14 European beetles released in 1989, the population had exploded into an estimated army of over 4 million active individuals, spanning an area of more than 200,000 acres of dense woodland. In the zones where the beetles had established their territory, the mortality rate of the mature fir trees dropped from a catastrophic 75% per year to less than 3%, a number that actually fell below the normal background mortality rate of a healthy forest. The predatory beetles had systematically decimated the destructive pest populations, reducing their numbers by over 99% within the core impact zones, effectively neutralizing the existential threat to the ecosystem. As the canopy recovered, the entire rest of the ecosystem experienced a profound, cascading rebirth. The return of the deep shade cooled the forest floor, allowing delicate native ferns and wildflowers to return, which in turn attracted a massive influx of pollinators and native birds that had abandoned the region years prior. The stabilizing of the root systems halted the devastating topsoil erosion, returning the local mountain streams to a state of crystal clear purity, which triggered a dramatic, unexpected resurgence in the spawning populations of endangered steelhead trout and Chinook salmon. A forest that had been explicitly written off as dead by the highest authorities in the nation had, without a single dollar of further human intervention, completely healed itself from the inside out. The extraordinary saga of the 14 European beetles reminds us that the true power of nature lies not in its individual components, but in the intricate, ancient webs of connection that human intellect can rarely predict and should never underestimate. In our frantic modern rush to dominate and manipulate the earth with heavy machinery and synthetic interventions, we often overlook the elegant, quiet mechanisms that have maintained the balance of our planet for millions of years. Sometimes, the most profound act of stewardship we can perform is to step back, recognize our own profound ignorance, and allow the small, invisible architects of the wild to restore the balance that we so carelessly disrupted. What are your thoughts on this remarkable ecological rescue? And do you believe we should trust biological solutions more often in modern conservation? If this story shifted your perspective on the hidden power of nature, please consider subscribing to the channel to support more deep dive documentary narratives. I am Christopher Vance, and thank you for listening.